Hey guys, we're going to be taking a look at the new Assetto Corsa Competizione footage. This is obviously the official Blancpain GT series game, and I think Assetto Corsa is going to do a very good job of this, considering how good the old game was. It's a very big car, this Nissan GTR. I've actually raced the older spec one, so I raced a 2017 spec. This is obviously a 2018 spec, but I raced it in the British GT Championship. And yeah, it's a very big car, very wide car, very tall car as well. I know this new one's had a lot of development going into it, but yeah, you can see really chucking it in over the curbs, picking up a little bit of understeer through there. But yeah, the car looks like it's handling very well. I'd imagine the handling is going to be good for the new Assetto Corsa game, considering it was so good in the previous game. I'd imagine they'd at least match that, if not improve on it. So I think the handling in this game looked very good. Looks like it's a bit of understeer at the moment, just generally in the car that we're looking at now. It could be a characteristic of the engine, of the physics model, or it could be just a characteristic of the car. It's difficult to say about actually driving it, or driving a few different cars anyway. But yeah, the car looks like it's driving well anyway. Definitely looks predictable, and GT cars, especially big GT cars like this, are generally pretty predictable. They're made that way so that you can have a wide variety of experience driving them, and getting the most out of them as well, getting as much as you can, because that's what GT racing is all about really. It tends to be obviously either Pro-Am or Pro-Pro, and to get a really good result you have to have two good drivers in the car, and that's the most important thing. It's, you know, the car's got to be good as well. That's you know, that's just obvious. The car's got to be good, the team's got to be good, but to get the actual result you've got to have two drivers that can get in the car and, you know, do the job. And if you've got a car that's more compliant, that's nicer to drive, it doesn't sort of bite you every time you push it too hard, then it's much nicer to work with than it is if you're, you know, if you've got a car that's very snappy oversteery, for example. So sort of as you turn into the corner, it snaps and you have to correct it. That doesn't really give a driver confidence, as you can imagine. So it's always nice to have a car with, especially a big car like this, with a slight bit of understeer. Which you'll probably see about now there, so you just see through the fast right and through the left a little bit. It's always better to be on that side of the fence rather than the oversteer. The oversteer side is more sort of for quali, you know. If you want the car to rotate a bit more so you can get the power sooner, it's great for quali because you can find, you know, quite a few tenths just by sort of holding the brake on and getting the car to rotate on the way in. But yeah, in the races, you know, you're doing 2-hour stints, you've got to be so consistent. You've got to manage your tyres really well as well. If the car's just sliding around everywhere, you're never going to be able to do that. So yeah, the driver went a little bit quicker that lap, so interesting to see. Mainly got it through that chicane. He backed off the speed a bit more, kept it a bit tighter to the inside, and then opened up the left, but got back to the power sooner, and yeah, had a bit of a better exit there. Turned it a little bit earlier there for turn one, and I think he found a bit on the exit because he was tighter through the right, opened up the left more, and then managed to get a better run on the way out. He's turned a bit early for here and got himself slightly out of shape on the way in here, sort of facing the wrong way a bit, lost a bit of time, scrubbed a bit of speed off I think, but still on for a, you know, a good lap at the moment. But as you can see here, take a lot of curb there, sort of ride over it. Not so much of the second one because there's a big sausage curb there, big orange sausage curb. You don't want to be using that really. Obviously if you hit that, which I think he did the other lap, it's going to jump the car up in the air and sort of make it bounce and possibly hop. And that hopping feeling is really not good. You really want to try and avoid that as much as possible, because, you know, the car is just sort of bouncing around and there's not much you can do about it really. It just tends to be because the cars are derived from a road car. There's some things you can't really fix. You can't sort of iron out everything. So hopping tends to be something that does happen. So it's kind of what I've experienced with my experience of driving the sort of road car derived cars, say the Nissan GTR. Porsche Carrera Cup, BMW M4, and sort of other cars similar to that. There's a lot of them that do tend to sort of sometimes get this sort of hop at the rear of the car. I've noticed a lot, especially at low speed corners more than anything. And part of it I imagine is because you know, the size of the tyres that we put on the cars. Racing slicks, big racing slicks, big wide tyres. You know, there'll be 305, 325 mil tyres, which are, you know, very, very wide. Compared to the road cars, which would normally only have, say, 225s or 210s. So, you know, the width of the tyre is, you know, massively going to change how the car handles. and yeah, that's going to have a big effect on how it feels, well, especially at low speed. So yeah, quite interesting to see how the game handles in terms of on those kind of feelings. Do you get that slight sensation of hopping right at the apex of a low speed corner, and kind of does that link back to real life. Another thing I've noticed as well is the sort of visor cam, which is like kind of I guess it's the driver's eye view again, really, but it's within the helmet. When they actually have it within the helmet, it's as you look into the corner, the helmet sort of tilts rather than actually looking to the right or left, for example. So when I'm driving in real life, I'd actually physically look into the apex with my head, like physically move my head and sort of face the corner before I've even got there, before I've even braked. So yeah, a little bit different there. So yeah, we'll take a look at the wet footage now, and again you'll be able to see then on that footage as well, and what I mean in terms of with the helmet moving around. So yeah, we'll start it up.
Green light, go.
So we'll set off now and again have a look at what the car's like to drive in the wet. It's quite interesting to kind of see what the car handles like, because you can see the surface obviously quite obviously very wet, gives you that really immersive feeling that you're driving in wet conditions. And yeah, sort of a lot more there's a lot more going on the track surface than in the dry. There's a lot more detail you can see. The racing lines not got any water on it, whereas offline there is water, and that's how it is in real life. Obviously cars drive along the racing line, they spray the water off the tyres, off the underside of the car from the downforce. So the racing line will always clear quicker than offline, and it'd be very interesting to see if the racing line would be to dry even quicker, and then potentially even go to dry. That would be fantastic. If I'm not sure if they're planning to do something like that, but that would be another step, I imagine, sort of, rather than just one bit of weather, making it progressive so the track actually dries out, and that would be like real life, because again that's very tricky conditions in real life, because it's kind of the patches of wet, patches of dry, and if you're on slicks and it's like a slightly damp track, you'll arrive at one corner and there'll be loads of grip because it'll be dry, and then you get to the next one and suddenly you hit a wet patch, and obviously there's no sort of tread blocks on a slick tyre, so no way of really dispersing the water, so you hit it and it's like driving on ice. It's terrible. So it'd be really interesting to see if that's something they can kind of incorporate, different levels, different amounts of wet in the game, or maybe it's something to look forward to in the future. I imagine developing everything you need to make a wet track, and then making it for all the cars work well on it. Also got all the AIs as well. I imagine it's very, very tricky, so there must be a lot to do for that anyway. But it would be good to see if it's something they could look to do in the future, if they don't for this version of the game anyway, just to see if they get that dynamic sort of weather changing, because that would be so lifelike, and I don't think anyone really does that at the moment. There's no sort of obvious games I can think of where you can find yourself in a wet line on a wet track, and then within the same session have it drying out on a dry line as such. So that would be a great one. Another thing I just noticed there is the driver was on the white line, maybe even a bit of paint on the X on the left before turning in, and that is a very big no-no in real life. Anything that's got paint on it is incredibly slippery in the wet, unless it's very high grip paint, and then potentially it can be grippy. But generally the rule of thumb is your white lines, most of the curbs are very, very, very slippery in the wet conditions. So yeah, that's something as well that'd be really good to see put into the game, is say that white line there. If you drove on that before you turned in there in real life, you probably wouldn't make the corner. It really is that bad. I've had issues like that before at places like Snetterton, obviously in the UK, where at turn 1 Riches it's a very quick corner, 5th gear corner, and in the wet, it was dry on slicks, but it was a drying line, it was still damp on the ground. I went onto the white line, turned in, and lost the rear of the car and went onto the grass on the outside during the race, and it was an inch too far to the left before turning in, and it just caused me to have a massive slide. It's just because the paint doesn't sort of disperse the water as much as the tarmac does. The tarmac can tend to to hold it, or or you can push it out of it, so at least you've got some dry surface. But the water tends to just sit on the surface of the paint, and you can't really see it because it's a white paint. So it's very tricky to know whether they're dry. So you tend to just avoid the white curbs and the white paint, and try and stay off them because they're very, very slippery. So that's another thing that'd be really good to see put into the game eventually. Again, it's such a minor detail. It may not be looked at for this version, but it would be great to see if it was put in at another time, just to make it even more realistic. Because that's why you see the F1 drivers at Monaco struggle so much in the wet, because obviously the road is a public road. It's got a lot of white lines across it, and they don't get rid of all of them. They can't do. There's so many, and when it rains there, you see, especially on the start of the race. I think someone crashed there last year. It might have been one of the Renaults, and they just lit up the rear wheels at the start, while after they'd already set off, purely on a white line, and there's nothing you can do, because once you've started to spin up the rear wheels in a straight line, unless you're very lucky and you lift out at the right time and save it, especially in a car like a Formula 1 car, it's very, very tricky to save that kind of slide. But you can see the cars moving around a lot here in the wet, which is exactly as you'd expect. Bit of understeer on the way into the corner, and a bit of oversteer on the way out. It's very normal for wet conditions, so that looks like it's set up really well. But so it'd be interesting to see as well another area. Wet driving, you tend to do what's called a karting wet line as such, which is what anyone that's done any kart racing will probably know what this is. You go on around the slightly longer line of the corner. So the final corner at Monza is a very good example. Where the racing line is, there will be rubber laid down, obviously already from the race weekend normally, if it's only rained overnight, for example. So you'd have rubber on the surface, where people have physically driven onto it. And what it does is, as the water rains onto that surface, it makes it very slippery. And because the water sits on top of the rubber, it doesn't sort of disperse into the tarmac. And you see what the driver did there is he kept it tighter on the exit, and just to see if there was any more grip there. And that, to me, is sort of is a wet line as such. So you would keep it tight on the inside, or you'd go really deep and then cut it back to the inside. And that's just to kind of stay off the rubber, where there's going to be more tarmac effectively. You're going to drive on tarmac rather than tarmac with a rubber surface on top, sort of where people have laid down rubber, and that will keep you on effectively a drier patch of the road, which is a lot less slippery. And it makes a huge difference. People don't realise how much of a difference it makes. So it's so important to try and do that if you're ever driving in the wet. Obviously on the track, not on the roads. Don't go start looking for the karting wet line on the public roads, because you're never going to find it. It's not like that. But on a game like this, it'd be great to see that on the system. So hope you enjoyed that pre-alpha gameplay footage, and a little bit of a replay here to have a look at. And you can see the spray off the rear of the car. Looks fantastic. Car looks really good. So hope you enjoyed that, guys, and hope you found it interesting. And I'll speak to you in the next one.